In 1956, while the world was getting increasingly more and more afraid of the possibility of nuclear war, British artist Gerald Holtham designed a symbol for the campaign for nuclear disarmament. You've seen it before. It's a circular symbol with a vertical line and then two diagonal lines going down. This symbol, the peace sign, it became a rallying cry for a world desperate to avoid destruction. Just a few years later, in the 1960s, the peace movement in the United States was starting to gain momentum as people were coming out against the Vietnam War. Protesters, they adopted Holtham's peace sign alongside a new gesture. Two fingers held up to make a V. This originally was kind of a resistance sign that stood for victory, but soon it just became kind of a general, simple, universal sign for peace and unity. Together, these two signs, they became kind of iconic as part of a larger cultural shift that was happening. You see, people needed a way to express kind of this counterculture movement, this fight for civil rights, and these kind of became the icons for that. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., they connected these ideas, this pursuit of peace, with his dream, the dream they had of equality, of reconciliation, of social justice, of human dignity. And so although we might think of these as just hippie signs, historically and even today, their presence is pretty significant. They symbolize something that's pretty great. They've actually, in some sense, grown over time. Today you see the peace sign all the time. You see it on bumper stickers, as posters. There's an emoji for it. You might use this peace sign here with the two fingers as kind of a casual greeting. Maybe you would use it even as a way you pose for a photo. And so what do these symbols mean? Well, the thing about these symbols is I believe they're pointing to a peace that it often feels like we will never have. There's an ideal of peace out there that we're all striving for, that we all desire, but when do we ever achieve it? You see, for all the protests, all the movements, all the gestures, whatever you think of all of that, our world still remains plagued by conflict, by division, by anxiety. We chase peace this way, we chase peace that way, but it seems like nothing we end up doing actually achieves that perfect peace that we desire. Yet we naively act all the time as if peace is something that we can just achieve if we try a little harder, right? If we just do it this way instead of that way, if we didn't make this mistake, instead we did this, then we could get to peace. I mean, just think for a moment about how much effort we put into pursuing peace. Politicians, on a global scale, they'll dedicate lifetimes to try to negotiate treaties, ceasefires, but yet wars and conflicts still continue all around the world. They keep cropping up. On a more personal scale, think about inner peace, which we haven't talked about yet. The self-help industry is worth billions, with a B, billions. People are selling meditation apps, calming teas, motivational books. Yet what do we see? We see anxiety rates are climbing every single year. And so this peace that we're trying to achieve, most of what we pursue, it really only offers temporary relief. Because as soon as the circumstances change, our fragile peace that we're clinging to, that shatters too. You see, that's why the message of Advent is so profound. You see, the hard truth is, as much as we try, we cannot achieve peace. But Jesus, the Prince of Peace, He doesn't just offer a fleeting calm. He gives true and lasting peace, rooted in who He is and what He's done. In Isaiah 9:6, it says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be on His shoulder, and His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." And so today, let's unpack how Jesus fulfills this promise and becomes to us the greatest picture of peace. In Colossians, which we've just read, we get this big idea. It's that peace is not something we achieve. It is something we receive through Jesus. Peace is not something we achieve. It is something we receive through Jesus. And so as we look at Colossians 1:15 through 20, this text will tell us two ways that we can receive peace through Jesus. Number one is peace through Jesus' sovereignty in creation. Everyone say creation. Paul, he's painting this picture of Jesus' sovereignty in creation, and he's looking at his power. He's looking at Jesus' authority, and he tells us many things. He tells us that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. That's what he leads with, right? Why is that so significant? Because this is saying Jesus is not just a messenger of God. He's not just a simple representative of God like the prophets of old. He is completely and fully God in the flesh. In verse 19 it says, "In him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell." And so he is the perfect picture, the perfect image of the invisible God. That's why Jesus says, "To see me is to see the Father." It's because he and the Father are one in the Godhead, in the Trinity. And so think about the difference between Jesus and us. What are we created in? The image of God. That's the difference between us and Jesus. Is we're created in the image of God. Jesus is the image of God in which we were created. That's the difference. We'll talk more about that next week whenever we get into Hebrews 1. But knowing this is so important because it actually explains what can be a point of confusion whenever we read the next thing that Paul says, which is that Jesus is the firstborn of all creation. We talked about this a little bit last week. This does not mean that Jesus was created. He's not the firstborn of creation, like the first thing that was created. It's not speaking to his beginning because he doesn't have one. He is the beginning. And so what is it saying? Well, it's instead speaking to his position. And so who are the firstborns in the room? Who are the firstborns in the room? Okay. I was remarking with the Carnes at our Christmas dinner, we missed out because just a few centuries ago we would get all these perks. Now if you're a firstborn, it doesn't mean much, right? You don't get any special privileges. But at this time, you go back a little bit of time, the firstborn, they would have been the first to receive the inheritance. They would have had all these different perks, and so we missed out. But in this context, it's speaking to how Jesus is first in line as the inheritor of what? Of all creation. And so he's using this language, Paul, to say how Jesus is taking all of creation as his inheritance. All of it belongs to him. All of it is, and he builds this point too. I mean, you look and he says all of creation exists to Jesus' glory. All of it is. And you know what? You know who's a part of creation? You and me. And so that's a part of our purpose too, is that our purpose is to glorify God. As he's building this point more and more, he calls him the creator of all things. And so this shows even more Jesus' involvement in creation and why it belongs to him so much, why he has the right to it. It's because everything in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, is from him and for him. And so, though some of us here in this room might sometimes fear these ideas of spiritual warfare, the fact that there are invisible powers out there that have real impact in the world today. We should not deny that. We should not pretend that that does not exist. Spiritual warfare is real. We are not called to fear. We are not called to trembling at that reality. Instead, we're called to confidence, even in knowing that, because who created even all those things and who has preeminence over all those things? Jesus. Whether things in heaven or on earth, visible or invisible, all things were created from him and for him. Meaning he is the source and he is the purpose for every single part of creation. Finally, it says he's the sustainer of all things. He's holding all things together. We talked about this too. It's like he's the glue of the universe, right? He's keeping everything together. You go down enough to a molecular level, even the greatest scientists will say, I don't know why the world works like it does. I don't know why these atoms fit together. Well, Jesus is the glue that fits everything together. Without Jesus, we wouldn't have a creation anymore. It would all be chaos if it continued to exist at all. It's his sustaining work in creation. And so, as we think about all these different things that Paul is highlighting about who Jesus is, what Jesus has done and what he's continuing to do, how are we supposed to apply these truths? Because these realities are written to us for a purpose. Well, I believe, as we're spending this service thinking about peace, that these truths about Jesus should give us an incredible peace. When we understand that Jesus is sovereign over creation, of which you and I and all of our situations are a part of, then we can rest in knowing that he's in control. Whenever I turned 16, the moment I got my driver's permit was a moment of long anticipated excitement for me and a moment of incalculable terror for my family. My family, they were constantly on edge as I was taking the wheel, as I was learning to drive. They didn't trust me, right? Why? My sister's in the room, she can attest. Well, I didn't have the experience or skill necessary to really have a lot of confidence. You know, I would miss things. I wouldn't notice the things that were happening around me. I'd wait until the very last minute to stop at a stop sign or a light. I just wasn't that good. And by the way, if you were to ask them today, apparently I'm still having those issues. But when my dad was driving, I was so jealous because all of a sudden, what was once a tense and anxious atmosphere in the car was immediately turned to calm. Everyone immediately felt much more at peace with my dad at the wheel. Well, why? Because he showed himself to be reliable. Everyone could trust him. In fact, this was the part I was most jealous about, is people could take a nap while he was driving. No one would be taking a nap while I was driving. They were looking out every single window to make sure everything was okay. But whenever he was driving, everyone could take a nap. Snoring, it's the greatest form of trust, right? I'd like to remind my wife of that whenever I'm snoring at night. Even whenever we were on long road trips with storms and really bumpy, tough roads, there would always be one of us kids conked out in the back. Why? Because we knew that Dad was going to get us where we needed to go. In the same way, no matter where it is we're going in our lives, we can have peace and find rest in knowing that Jesus is always at the wheel. You see, Carrie Underwood didn't need to sing Jesus Take the Wheel because he already has it. Okay? You don't give the wheel over to Jesus, he's already got it. No matter how we try to drive things in life, he's the one who's always in the driver's seat. Anyone ever go go-karting with a kid, a little kid maybe? If you go to some of these go-kart places, you'll find that they have a setup where there's a real wheel on one of the sides that actually controls where the cart goes, and then you've got a dummy pretend wheel for the kid to take. And so as, you know, the parent is driving us where we need to go, the kid, they have their own wheel. They think they're in control. And so they're turning it happily, thinking that they're moving us this way or they're moving us that way, when in reality it's the parent, it's the father, the mother who's actually driving. You see, that's a picture of how silly we must look to Jesus whenever we think that we're really the ones who are in control of our lives. We have this pretend wheel, convinced we're steering the direction of everything, while Jesus is the one who's actually holding the wheel. And so let me clarify, this isn't to say that our choices don't matter or that God doesn't empower us with responsibility. I believe He does, and He calls us to be faithful. But I think we're fools if we think we're the ones ultimately in control. Jesus, He's the one who's got it all. And so let me ask you something. Are you living your life today like Jesus has really got His hands on the wheel of everything going on in your life right now? There's some of you right now, and you're uncertain about your future. You don't know what tomorrow holds. You don't know what's coming next. And the idea of not even next year, not even next week, but even just the idea of facing tomorrow is a difficult prospect. Just know that Jesus' hands are on the wheel. There are some of you that are walking through pain, through sorrow, through loss. And as we get closer and closer to the holiday season, you are not looking forward to it because there will be people who are not there this time. Know that Jesus' hands are on the wheel. There are some of you that are fighting what seems like an uphill battle. You've got all these things being thrown at you. Maybe a health issue, maybe a financial issue, maybe a mental issue, whatever it may be. And as you're fighting this fight, you just feel your energy being drained and you don't know how much longer you can go on. Jesus' hands are on the wheel. You see, all of our difficult situations, it's very easy whenever we're caught up in them, whenever life feels chaotic and out of control, to become anxious. But you know what? That anxiety should be replaced with peace whenever we realize one truth, that Jesus has got His hands on the wheel of everything going on in our lives. You see, the key to having peace in life is trusting Jesus is driving enough to rest. Even whenever we travel through storms, we take dangerous roads, we can take a nap knowing that Jesus is going to get us where we need to go. Some of us today, we need a nap. Amen? When's the last time you took it? When's the last time you took that nap? You were just so confident enough in Jesus' driving to simply rest. The second way that we can receive peace through Jesus is peace through Jesus' sovereignty in reconciliation. Everyone say reconciliation. And so it's His sovereignty in creation and it's sovereignty in His reconciliation. You see, the peace Jesus brings to us is not just a peace that comes from His sovereignty over creation. It also comes from how He's restoring that creation. In verse 20 it says that Jesus is reconciling all things to Himself, making peace by the blood of His cross. And so one way we understand Jesus' peace is relational, because on the cross, Jesus brings peace to our relationships. One helpful way I like to remember this is that if you just look at a cross, right? And so visualize a cross. Everyone do this. Everyone do this right here. Visualize that cross, right? What makes up that cross? There is a vertical beam and there is a horizontal beam. I like to think of that as a picture of the two kinds of relational peace that Jesus brings. On one hand, you have the vertical beam. This is your vertical relationship with God. You see, sin separated us from God, but through the blood of the cross, Jesus, He removes that barrier, He bridges that gap, and we're no longer enemies of God, but now we're beloved children. We're brought near to God in love, in relational intimacy. That's the vertical beam. That's the kind of relational peace that Jesus' cross gives us. Next is the horizontal beam. That's a horizontal peace because Jesus not only reconciles us with God, He reconciles us with each other. The cross, it doesn't just deal with one type of relationship, but both. It empowers us to live at peace. Because in Christ, there's no room for bitterness, there's no room for hatred, there's no room for division. He wipes it all away. We're brought near to one another. He calls us to forgiveness. He calls us to unity. And so on both of those dimensions, vertical and horizontal, Jesus, he makes us, he gives us a new identity. He makes us a reconciled people. We're now a reconciled people by the cross. And you know what? He has headship among his reconciled people. Paul, he describes Jesus as the head of the body, the church. It doesn't mean he reconciles us, he fixes us up and leaves us. He fixes us up and he stays with us. He's there with us. The reconciled lives that we've been given are meant to be spent in relationship with both him and with each other. And that's a perfect picture of the church. You see, what is the church? What is the church? The church, summed up, is the ultimate picture of having both vertical peace and horizontal peace at once. In the church, we have horizontal peace with each other, and we have vertical peace with God. He gathers us together as a body so that he can be our head. That is what the church is. As the head, he leads us, he directs us, he sustains us, he cares for us in all the different parts of our lives as we come and join together in our own togetherness. However, Jesus' reconciliation, it's not just limited to the present, right? Unlike all the other pieces we might achieve, this isn't fleeting. It actually is eternal, because this text points to a future where Jesus will fully restore all things from brokenness to himself. One day there will be no more sin, no more suffering, no more loss, no more conflict, because perfect peace will be accomplished forever. This is a promise that the peace Jesus gives is not temporary, it is eternal. The greatest guarantee we have of this promise is found in Jesus' own resurrection. Paul describes him as being the firstborn from the dead. Jesus' resurrection, it was the first of its kind, and it was the greatest of its kind. He paves the way for our own resurrection. As our head, as the head of the church, he leads the way for us. And he leads us where? He leads us into eternal life. You see, whenever we trust in him, what are we promised? A resurrection like his. A glory like his. He shares in that inheritance which is due to him. He shares in that inheritance with us. And that is a life that is free from pain, from sin, from death. It is a life which is spent forever in relational intimacy with him and with others. That's eternal security. You see, we don't have to worry now about the uncertainties of this life because we have the certainty of resurrection. And so no matter what we face in life, whatever hardships, whatever conflicts, fighting, pain, suffering, loss, we don't have to worry. We don't have to fear. Even death itself, the ultimate threat, it's already been defeated. We have that ultimate security in him. And this is a unique thing about the peace that Jesus gives, which no other can claim. No one else can claim this truth but Jesus and his peace, is that the peace Jesus gives is a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. It is eternal. It is a peace which the world cannot take away. Jesus said in John 14:27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." You see, even in our darkest moments, his peace remains. Horatio Spafford, he was a successful lawyer and businessman in Chicago in the late 19th century. He was deeply committed to his faith. He was known for his generosity. But in 1871, his life took a tragic turn. In the Great Chicago Fire, he lost a lot. He lost investments, properties, all of his real estate, and it basically left him financially broken. 2 years later, as he was seeking rest and a little relaxation from this devastation, he planned a trip to Europe and with him and his family. And at the last minute, he was delayed. He had some business matters to attend to. And so he sent his wife and his children ahead of him. And tragically, as they were going, his wife and his 4 daughters, the ship tragically collided with another ship. And his 4 daughters passed away as a result. A little while later, he got this haunting telegram from his wife. Saved alone. She was the only one left. And so as Horatio Spafford was grieving, he boarded a ship to join his wife in England. And as his ship passed over the spot where his 4 daughters died, he felt inspired to write out these words. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. See, Spafford's peace, it wasn't grounded in his circumstances. It wasn't something that was grounded in what he could achieve. Spafford's peace was grounded in Christ, the one who created him, the one who sustained him, the one who reconciled him. See, our big idea I shared at the beginning is that peace is not something that we achieve. It is something we receive through Jesus. And so where do you need to receive Jesus' peace in your life? Where do you need to receive Jesus' peace in your life? I'd encourage you to ask this question in your small groups today. Is there an area of your life that just feels crazy, out of control? Maybe that's because you're living as if you have the steering wheel instead of Jesus. You're failing to rest in His control. Are there areas of your life where you need reconciliation? Where perhaps you're holding on to bitterness, you're struggling to forgive, maybe you've caused hurt and you need healing between you and another person. Perhaps the reconciliation you need is actually vertical. And you're carrying around this guilt, this shame with you wherever you go. You need to have that relational intimacy with God. Let me encourage you, do not let this Advent season pass without receiving the peace which Jesus gives. It is a beautiful gift, the peace He gives us in creation, the peace He gives us in reconciliation. Whenever it washes over us, we can simply rest in it. If you've never done that, I'd love to give you an opportunity. I'd love the opportunity to talk with you, and so please come see me. Please come see one of your small group leaders or one of our elders. I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. But as we close service, I just want to take a moment to reflect over these things and pray. I want to think about this peace, whether we're living in it, whether we're consciously recognizing it if we are. And so just take a moment and just use this time to invite, to receive that peace which Jesus gives into your life.